Conversation with the candidate continues.
Thank you for clicking on our extended digital conversation with the candidate. With our candidate tonight, Mayor Wayne Messam of Miramar, Florida. We're going to continue with the questions from New Hampshire voters, and we're going to start off with Benjamin Pelletier.
Hello, Mayor, and welcome to New Hampshire. Do you believe in universal background checks for people purchasing guns? If so, how will you get your plan past the NRA supporters in Congress?
Well, I think it's a great question, Benjamin, and what we do know is that the climate we're seeing in this country right now in terms of gun violence, mass shootings, and just the access to guns and the travesty it's causing across this country, that we cannot as a nation accept this as the new norm. I think there are some low-hanging fruit that we can do, and one that you mentioned in terms of universal background checks. I do support that. I do agree with that, because I believe that those individuals who should not have a gun shouldn't have them. If you're on a terror watch list, if you have certain mental health care conditions that would disqualify you in being a competent gun owner, I think you should not have them. And there are signs that can help us to detect these individuals. But by implementing that, that should be the direction we should go. And I think in terms of how do we get this past a Congress that is influenced by the NRA, I can tell you what I'm doing right now in the city of Miramar, Florida. In the state of Florida, there are preemption laws where local mayors cannot pass any ordinances dealing with the regulation of firearms or ammunition. In fact, the NRA-backed legislature actually put a chilling provision, penalty provision in our state statute that even if we pass these laws at a local level, for example, if we don't want to have assault-style weapons in our parks where our kids are playing, the governor can remove me from office, personally fine me $5,000. I can't use the city attorney to defend me. It's that type of chilling effect. So I'm suing the state of Florida right now, and other cities have joined in on that lawsuit so that we can remove that punitive damage. Because of the ambiguity of that state statute, we don't even talk about it at the local level in fear that we could be removed from office. And that's a shame. So I refuse to accept that. As president, I will refuse to have an administration that will bow down to the NRA and those Congress women and men who will not stand up to the NRA, and go to the American people, because it's the American people who must hold Congress accountable, along with the supportive presidency that will sign a bill that will eradicate this danger. I'm a supporter of the Second Amendment. I believe that we all should have the right to bear arms, but I think we should bear them responsibly. And if we keep the guns out of the hands of those individuals who should not have them, perhaps we will not see an incident like Parkland that took place just 15 minutes from the city of Miramar, where I'm the mayor, and we actually sent police officers to respond to that incident. So I'm not speaking rhetoric, I'm speaking what I'm living. And I have the experience in actually going through litigation right now. And that will be the same tenacity that I would bring to the Oval Office.
Thank you, Benjamin. Quick follow-up on this topic, Mr. Mayor. We know that there will probably be, at some point, Democrats are able to pass something, whether it squares with the Second Amendment or not, unclear. But there could be civil disobedience around this issue from people who support the Second Amendment. And clearly that would also involve guns. So what would be your approach as president? If you're able to pass certain gun control measures, but certain people don't want to abide by them, what would be the response, perhaps from the U.S. Attorney General?
Well, the thing is that let's look at what would be passed. You know, bringing back the provisions of the Brady Bill that, stop certain types of guns from being imported and manufactured, like assault-style weapons. That's just a matter of what's being produced and what's being sold. So there shouldn't be an outcry for that. When you talk about having universal background checks for individuals who would seek to purchase a firearm, who either don't have the mental capacity or have committed certain crimes, or on a terror watch list, these individuals, to prevent them. So I think we have to be very clear in terms of what is the legislation that is being passed. I think the American people are smart enough to realize the efforts to stop those who shouldn't have guns to have guns versus coming to Mary and Joe's residence to take their handgun away from them. And that will not be the case. And that's not what I would ever advocate. So I think we have to be clear in terms of what anti-gun legislation that would be passed so that the American people can be very clear that it's not taking their guns, but it's preventing those who shouldn't have guns from getting guns and stopping the access to guns that have been designed and manufactured just to annihilate life and not to hunt or perhaps even protect.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Next question comes from Marie Mulroy.
Yes, hi, how are you? Welcome to New Hampshire. This question you've talked about a little bit before, so I'm going to ask it again in case you have anything else to add. And that has to do with the fact that there's nearly 24 candidates right now running for office, and how you position yourself such that you're going to stand out in this crowded field.
Well, you know, I present myself obviously as a unique candidate. You know, I'm one of only a few mayors that are running outside of Washington. You know, first, you know, when you talk about a crowded field, I think voters are looking for someone who they feel is authentic and someone who has the experience of who they see who can be the president of the United States. One thing I will say is that, you know, I've always been an underdog. Being the son of immigrants, my parents came from Jamaica. My father was a contract sugarcane cutter. My mother was a cook that used to go out in the fields to feed them. You know, I was never expected to go to Florida State University to play football for legendary coach Bobby Bowden, much less win a national championship, to wear an NFL uniform, to be the first black mayor of a very diverse city, one of the largest cities in the state of Florida, and to even be contemplated as president. So I've been an underdog all my life. I've been the dark horse all my life. So standing out is something that I've always been successful at. And then what I would ask New Hampshire voters to do is just to visit my website at wayne4usa.com and to help me get to the debate stage, because I believe I can bring, as you can see, very different responses to the questions that you're asking, and I can relate them to the experiences that I've done in the city of Miramar.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And a quick follow on this one too, Mr. Mayor. We see Mayor Pete Buttigieg has had this meteoric rise. Some people have questioned, you know, with you getting less attention, if that is an issue of race. Do you see any racial bias or perhaps white privilege on the other side of that in the Buttigieg versus Messam discussion?
You know, I'll let the pundits answer that question. But what I will say is that as mayors, you can see we bring a unique candidacy. All I'm saying is give me my fair share of exposure. You know, if I have the ability to have a CNN town hall or whatever network town hall where millions of Americans can understand and have a glimpse of the life of Wayne Messam and my policy proposals, like to forgive the $1.5 trillion in outstanding student loan debt, perhaps there may be a certain percentage of those millions that would support me. And then I would get invited to some of the other places where Mayor Pete has been invited. So I think it's more so of a matter of exposure. So all I say is that give me my fair share of exposure, and I think that enough Americans will support me to get to the point to perhaps even surpass Mayor Pete. And I have nothing against my colleague. I think what we all bring to the table is a unique life experience, definitely not a traditional person who should be considered president for the United States. And I think what Americans will see as they're seeing unique candidates like us, that there are viable options that are from outside of Washington that will work hard to solve the challenges and the needs of the American people.
Next question comes from Joan Wentworth.
Good evening, Mayor. Affordable housing is becoming a very serious problem in this country, both in places that have experienced rapid economic growth and in rural areas. Nationwide, nearly a quarter of all renters are now classified as severely rent-burdened, spending more than half of their incomes on rent, with African Americans and seniors being especially hard hit. How will you address this crisis in affordable housing if you are elected president?
Thank you for your question. In fact, in South Florida and even in my own city, it's a very tough situation, especially not just even affordable housing. There's even a problem just for workforce housing and what we call attainable housing. And we have to be intentional about our programs. In the state of Florida, we actually, in real estate closings, we have a Sadowski Trust Fund where in real estate closing, a certain percentage of that closing goes to this trust fund to be invested into affordable housing. But guess what the state of Florida does every year? We collect about $300 million per year in this fund. and is swept every year in the legislative session to go to the general fund to fund other priorities, in the tune of over, I think, a couple $2 billion since the inception of the fund, that should be dedicated to housing, that could help my city. So I think as president, we would make these irrevocable commitments to help fund housing that can't be diverted into other interests or diverted into other causes outside of housing. We have to have the commitment in our communities, because we cannot have cities, and whether it's rural or urban, where only the rich or only the well-off can afford to live in the places where we work. And we must continue to have the commitment and the funding sources to be able to be committed to ensure that everyone has a decent place to reside.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joan. And a quick follow on this one, Mr. Mayor. How involved should the federal government be in the housing market? Some people contend that involvement sometimes warps things in the wrong way.
Well, the thing is, on the federal level, I'm not saying that there should be regulations, down to the actual allocation of the funding. I think making the funding available and rewarding those states, rewarding those municipalities that have the best programs to meet the need of housing in those communities should be awarded that funding. And I think when you let the creativity of local investors, local communities to solve their local challenges, and again, that's being a mayor, these are the home rule issues that we fight for and strive for, because if we provide, when the federal government works with local government, and give local government the autonomy to solve its issues. The local government knows what works for their respective community. So the federal government shouldn't be telling local cities, what to do without the proper resources. Provide the resources and the local community can solve their challenges, and I'm convinced of that.
Next question comes from Carolyn Morrill.
Hi. I'm in the group that you call seniors, meaning I am on Medicare. And there I have to pay my Medicare premium, Part D premium, and also a supplement. Unfortunately, a lot of candidates are doing Medicare for all free. And a lot of the young voters, people under 65, feel that 1% is going to pay for the rest of their medical bills. Where do you stand on health care?
Thank you for your question. As I mentioned earlier, I think that access to health care is a civil right. There's been a lot of discussion about Medicare for all. I think that's a plausible solution because it's something that exists and people can touch and feel it, and they see that it provides health care for Americans. I think my position is a little different than what you're hearing for everyone. I think in a perfect world, a single payer process or universal health care would be the best solution. But we know in this climate and in this Washington environment, coming from where we are right now with the Affordable Care Act to universal health care is a large leap. I believe that those individuals who do not have access to health care can be brought into the Medicare system. But I also believe in choice. If you're a young American or maybe a senior American, and if you have an employer-provided or a private-provided insurance plan that you like your doctor, you like your plan, you should be able to keep that. But those who may have insurance from an employer or private insurance that does not like it and want to move over and bring their premiums over to the Medicare plan, I think should be able to do that as well. So I think that approach will not only provide exceptional health care for those who don't want to make a change and they choose to stay where they are because they're happy with what they have, but it also captures the individuals who don't have access to health care or perhaps want to go into the government program. And I think that is it's not, some people may call that gradualism. I just say it's a practical approach to including those who don't have insurance while not disrupting those individuals who are happy with their current plan. And I think it's a practical solution as a first step as we work towards getting to a universal health care solution.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Carolyn. Next question comes from Lauren Selig from Durham.
Hi, thank you so much for being here. I'm married to a local government official, so I appreciate how difficult your job is. My question has to do with the judiciary. As we've seen over the past several years, the head of the Senate has blocked appointments and blocked the ability for people to even consider nominations, not just at the Supreme Court level, but also at the lower courts. I'd like to know what you would do to protect the judiciary.
Well, many folks are asking candidates, will you stack the courts, will you increase the number of Supreme Court justices? And I think the courts have already been stacked. President Obama was denied his appointment. And I think that's a travesty. And it's the politics that, the Senate leader, McConnell, is taken. And what I will say is that if the Republicans want to play that game while I'm the President of the United States, that I will defend the rights so that I can make my appointments to the Supreme Court, so that ensures that there's a balance in our Supreme Court. Because what has happened right now is there's a stacking that has taken place. We don't have to extend or expand the number of justices. The Republicans have already done that just from their actions, our lack of, in President Obama's case. So I think we speak truth to power as it relates to actually what happened. And that is why these questions are coming forward. But I will not sit back idly and just let, for example, a Republican majority Senate dictate who should be appointed to the Supreme Court while I'm President of the United States.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lauren. And following up on that, Mr. Mayor, some candidates have come out and said they support a litmus test on abortion for Supreme Court justice nominees or even judicial nominees. What do you think about that?
Well, I think it's very dangerous. It's very dangerous if a particular Supreme Court justice candidate or potential nominee would want to revert what has been precedent or established law, as it specifically relates to Roe v. Wade and abortion. That's settled law. And as president, I will defend the fact that that is settled law. So I would expect any nominee to come from a Messam administration nomination to respect the Constitution, as well as to keep or to hold true to precedent that has been set.
Is there anything the president can do, though? I mean, we see in states in the South right now a move toward creating a legal framework that is designed to challenge Roe v. Wade. What can the president do about that issue of abortion?
Well, I think what presidents can do is to ensure that you have an attorney general and a justice department that will defend our laws. And currently, right now, that is the law of the land. When you have an administration like the current administration that is basically providing an environment to challenge what has been set as established law, that is a problem. But as president, it is important that who you have as an attorney general, and to understand that the attorney general is the attorney general for the American people and not for my administration, as we're seeing right now in Washington.
We have a social media question, this one from Damian McConnell. He says, please explain your views on trans equality.
Well, in terms of the trans equality or LGBTQ rights, I think that, as a nation, we should be a nation of acceptance. We should be a nation that welcomes individuals to live their truth, their lives, in the way that they want to live their lives, and you don't hear this a lot from Democrats, but I'm a Christian, and the one thing I know that what my Bible teaches me is that there's one thing that my God doesn't make me do. He doesn't force me to serve him. So why should I force my religious belief on the American people? That's my private decision. It's my private religious position. But whether it's a religious issue or if you see this as an issue as a person identifying with their sexuality or their sense of being, that has nothing to do with another person. That's person's choice. They should have free reign and free ability to be able to live their lives without discrimination.
Next question comes from Dan Bergeron.
Mayor Messam.
Yes.
I admire your success on and off the field.
Thank you.
Now, when asked about this new field you're playing in, the Sun Sentinel referenced your statement, I don't compare myself to the other mayor, which you referenced earlier. And when recently asked to clarify his charter schools, he said charter schools have a place statement. He sort of followed that up with his concern about public school divestment. So I guess at this point in time, could you clearly explain your plan for education funding and how that may impact Manchester School District, the largest in the state, as well as other districts?
Well, just in general, I think every American child should have the best education possible in the world.
No disagreeing here.
And with that stated, obviously right now the evolution of education has gone from to public school systems, private schools, charter, not-for-profit charters, for-profit charters. My position has always been in terms of public education. I support the full funding of public education. I do not support any policy or any funding recommendations that will take 1 cent away from the full funding of public education. I have nothing against charter schools. I have nothing against private schools. I'm not even saying that charter schools can't get public funding. All I'm saying is that public schools should never be at the mercy or be sacrificial lambs in terms of funding as it relates to funding other forms and options of education.
Agreed.
All right, thank you, Jim.
Thank you.
Quick follow-up on that topic, Mr. Mayor. In Florida, there's this huge debate going on, and some of you might be aware of this too, in post-Parkland, the idea of discipline. And that the shooter in that case, there's a big debate around the school-to-prison pipeline and how that case was handled. So from your perspective in Florida, where do you stand on the issue of school discipline and what to do about students, some of whom are diverted into the prison and their lives are changed for the worse, but then obviously you have these other situations where there are people who need the disciplinary action and didn't get it in the case of Parkland. So where do you stand on that?
Well, I think what has happened is that, and these are where you see disparities in terms of discipline in schools. What was happening, for example, Robert Runcie is the superintendent for Broward schools. I think that we have the 6th largest school district in the nation. And before he became superintendent, Broward County was not number one of the highest school districts from pipeline, from classroom to jail. And he changed that with his policies and programs, where kids were graduating from school, they were not going to jail, and it was a great program. I think the program that was implemented in Broward County was misrepresented in terms of why that shooter did what he did in Parkland. And other school districts that have diversion programs, these are good programs, because what these programs do is that it prevents students, specifically students of color, from being unnecessarily incarcerated, scarred for the rest of their lives, for either juvenile mistakes that are interpreted as criminal, and you've now impaired that individual's ability to serve in our military, to get a job. They have to check the box. And oh, by the way, in the city of Miramar, we ban checking the box on applications, which is a question that asks if you've been arrested, which basically disqualifies you. They don't even look at your qualifications. And it's so important that we have that cultural and diversity sensitivity, that things are different. A black boy and a black girl sometimes, and a lot of times, are not treated the same as their peers. And it's just a fact. And these diversion programs allows a stepgap to be able to prevent those type of situations. Or perhaps a kid just makes a mistake. God knows I made mistakes growing up. Sometimes, if we're all honest, it's just that perhaps you didn't get caught by the teacher in doing something, right? So if we're in a country that believes in a second chance, I think we're better off. And these diversion programs give kids a second chance, because that's what they are. They're kids. Now, if there's individuals who have created crimes in school, they should be dealt with appropriately. But oftentimes, it's little mistakes that ruins kids' lives. And as president, I would support programs that would provide options for kids to be educated well, to challenge them to be problem solvers, to be producers, because quite frankly, our education system is not preparing us for this gig economy. It's not preparing us for us to remain an economic power. When we have to import programmers from other countries, while we have kids who are delinquent, you know, our electoral process was challenged from a cybersecurity standpoint. We're getting cyber threats on our military systems, our financial systems, our medical systems. We need to be training hundreds of thousands of programmers just to defend our data systems. And as president, these will be focuses of mine. In fact, we will be investing in every high school child to be an entrepreneur. Whether they're going to start a business themselves or not, then at least they have the skill sets to know that I'm going to bring an entrepreneurial mindset to my employer. Or if I've worked 10 years, I can take the skill sets that I've developed, or perhaps I was laid off by my employer. Now I can land on my feet, use the skills and resources and certifications I got with that employer to start my own business. Because now automation, virtualization, artificial intelligence is defining the definition of work. And our workforce is not prepared. So we need to ensure that we are investing in your children and your grandchildren to make sure that they can make money for themselves while solving our problems. Not only solving our problems, but solving these world's problems, creating new jobs. Right now, if you're a child or if you're an Uber driver, in a few more years, they're going to be releasing fleets of autonomous Uber and Lyft vehicles. What are going to happen to the millions of drivers? We shouldn't fear that. We should be preparing them to service this new industry. Someone has to program them. Someone has to service them when they're on our streets. Someone even has to clean them after someone gets in there after a party and they relieve themselves in there, right? That's a business. So if we're teaching our kids to be entrepreneurial minded, that when displacement and disruption of employment takes place, that they're empowered and have the skill sets to be able to make a living for themselves and their families.
You speak of entrepreneurship, job creation. That's political territory that Republicans like to own. So as a business owner and a Democrat, is there anything you think Democrats get wrong about being a business owner and dealing with business in government?
Well, I think there's another thing that speaks to my uniqueness as a candidate. You know, I'm a business owner, you know, and I'm a Democrat and bleed blue. And I love to make money as a business owner because I need to make money to hire the best employees so I can pay them properly so they can take care of their families. I don't concede that creating jobs is a Republican lane because I'm a Democrat who's a mayor, who owns a business and who loves to make money, but yet I pass the living wage in my city because I believe our employees shouldn't have to work 2 and 3 jobs just to make ends meet. I brought over 5,000 jobs to my city, on averaging over $70,000 a year. So I know how to create jobs. I know how to start a business. I have a climate conscious business who helped build one of the greenest elementary schools in America. So as a candidate, I will work hard to not only create jobs, but to prepare our American people and our future generation on how to become entrepreneurs so that we can create more doers, more inventors, to inspire this country to do great things. This entire candidacy for the nomination has talked about restoring America to some form of normalcy since Trump has been elected. But the last I checked was that normalcy before Trump wasn't working for every American. We need to be shooting much higher. And I want our country to dream again, to be inspired, to just be not the great that Trump talks about, but to be beyond that word. Because we truly have the assets, we truly have the resources, and we truly have the American people that can make it happen.
One quick final question here. We asked this of Mayor Pete Buttigieg. Is there any project going on in your city, if you become president, that you're going to hate to walk away from, that you want to see it finished?
Well, I would say, you know, in our historic side of town, and Miramar relatively is young. We were founded in 1955. But in our historic side of town, the side of the town that basically kept the city propped it up as we grew. We were one of the fastest growing cities at one point in the country. We're putting in a new water treatment plant. We're putting in new storm sewers in our city, new water distribution, and we're revitalizing historic downtown Miramar. And that's been an area that has been neglected, you know, over the years. I ran for office, you know, talking about let's bring up historic Miramar. It's a very we've made so much progress in the area, and that would be something that even from the Oval Office, I'll be keeping my eye on and making sure that it's done right.
All right, Mayor Wayne Messam, thank you
you
so much for joining us for Conversation with the Candidate. Thank you to our studio audience of New Hampshire voters, and thank you for watching. Have a great evening.
Thank you, everyone.